Greetings everyone, this is Germane again. As you know, we are presenting this Journey Through the Galactic Heritage Cards series for you, not just because of the exploration of the cards, but also because it is a nice window into the beginning understanding of the journey taken by your galactic family and how that journey affects you here on Earth at this time. So in the last couple of segments, we began the journey into some of the more physical civilizations who went through similar incarnational patterns as humans have, and we're still continuing that series now. Once again, we remind you that it's suggested, especially if you're not familiar with our material, that you watch the videos from the beginning so that you can have a contextual understanding of the material that we're presenting. So today we are going to explore the civilization of the Pleiades. And before we go into the cards, we'll just say a few brief things about the civilization because there's been some misunderstandings about them. Firstly, though you know that the 7 stars you see in the sky that you call the Pleiades have been really revered on your world for thousands of years by many, many cultures, the Pleiadian civilization itself is not necessarily from those particular stars, but rather in this time that we speak to you now, the Pleiadian civilization has expanded so far outward into more than 250 colonies in the general neighborhood of your galactic family's experiences. So the Pleiadian civilization in that sense is not indigenous to those 7 stars you see in the sky. Very often in ancient times, when a being from a Pleiadian civilization would be visiting you on your world, and perhaps they were asked by an ancient human, where are you from? It was very easy for them to simply point to the sky in the direction of the Pleiades. And that was a way to communicate an idea of an extraterrestrial origin, but it was not always necessarily meant in a very literal way. Now, if we are to look at the lineage then, of who became the Pleiadian civilizations, you would find that primarily they come from Lyra lineage. However, within the Pleiadian civilization, there are basically 2 different subgroups. One we can call pure Lyran, which and they eventually migrated from those Lyran colonies, eventually beginning to form their own colonies and re-identifying themselves. And then there was another group who migrated to Earth from Lyra in the very, 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 very ancient days of your world with pre-humans here on the planet. They settled in the area that you now know of as Northern Europe, the Scandinavia area, the areas that are now on your world very cold. And they lived here, these Lyrans from the ancient times, lived here peacefully for many generations. They even went through the process of incorporating some of the indigenous DNA from primate species within themselves to allow their bodies to adapt more to life on Earth, atmospheric composition, gravity, things such as that. So that means then this Lyran group became what you could call an Earth Lyran group. Eventually, however, a lot of conflict from out there, let's say, came to your solar system, and these Earth Lyrans made a very heart-wrenching decision to leave what had been their home for many generations. So they left Earth, they left the solar system, and they went and joined the other Lyran lineage that had re-identified themselves. These two lineages then came together and became what you now know of as the Pleiadian civilization. So in terms then of age, we have to say here that though we know that the human mind really likes to have things plotted on a linear course in order to understand, but when you're talking about galactic time and trying to place it on a linear map, so to speak, that matches the time stream on Earth, it's very, very difficult because, as you know, time is a convenience for third density beings, but it is not really the reality. That being said, though, we can say that the Pleiadian civilization then is a younger civilization than the Lyran civilization. And because of this youngness, so to speak, they are a little bit more relatable to humans and by humans, whereby humans feel that they are cousins in some way. Understandable cousins. And that leads us then to today's lesson with the Galactic Heritage Cards, because we are going to explore today the Pleiadian civilization in what we call First Era. On the cards, it's written as, it doesn't say First Era, it simply says past. What this is referring to is one of the youngest eras of the Pleiadian civilization's history. Now, you're going to find when you look at galactic history that most physical civilizations have a common history in terms of how they evolve. Species go through their typical challenges as a young species, and it's pretty much predictable. If you are a galactic social scientist, as an example, and you watch civilizations develop, you're going to see basically the same patterns. And that's what we're going to explore today, some of these very, very early Pleiadian patterns that manifested themselves within individuals and as a society in those very early Pleiadian times. Now, you're also going to see then, because we're talking about typical patterns, typical sociological patterns of one of your extraterrestrial forefathers, you're going to see that the same patterns are true for humans as well throughout their development within the third density reality. So there's very, very much of a parallel here. Okay, so we go then to the very first card that we have here. It's number 39, Pleiadian card from the First Era, and the theme is imbalance in the positive polarity. Now, sometimes this card has been a little bit misunderstood, and we're going to try to clarify that a little bit today. It has to do with one of the deepest patterns of the Pleiadian species in their young time. The pattern was that they did not like to see their own darkness. And because there was an unwillingness to see their shadow, they tended to push down within themselves the undesirable things that they did not want to see. Now, this is true, again, on the individual level as the person, and it's also true on a societal level as well. So therefore, the Pleiadians became kind of unbalanced in the sense that they seemed, maybe at that time, if you were to look at them now, at that time then, ungrounded or a little bit out of touch with reality because they were not willing to integrate the shadow within. Now, this ended up being one of their deepest, most painful experiences as a species, because what happened over time, of course we're talking about thousands of years here now, looking at it from the bird's eye view, What happened over time was that all of the negative energy that they were not willing to see within themselves and within their society and within their habitual habits and patterns, that energy had to go somewhere. And so the energy got pushed down, pushed down, pushed down within the bodies of the beings and also within the collective psyche of the civilization as well. There's only so long you can push down negative energy until it finds a way to come out and reveal itself. So at some point then, as this civilization was evolving, they began to manifest what you might call a plague. It's similar to what you have on your world, HIV/AIDS, in the sense that it began to eat away at the immune system of these beings. Now, it's not HIV, it's not AIDS or anything like that. We are saying it's similar to that. So over time then, the immune system of these beings got weaker, weaker, weaker. They were feeling their own imbalance, but it was playing out physically. Because when emotional energy is pushed down and not looked at, not embraced, not released, the only way that that energy can be expressed or released is through the physical body. So that's why this plague was created. They tried all sorts of ways to heal it. Nothing worked. Eventually, they asked for help from what you might call the shamanic masters of a civilization, the medicine men, the shaman, the magicians, if you wish to say. And these beings were able to go really deep within the collective psyche of the civilizations, and they saw the issue. They saw the darkness. They saw that it had been pushed down, that it was not being processed, and that's what was creating this imbalance. Therefore, this is a long process. They began a very long process as a species of looking at the shadow and healing themselves and embracing their wholeness. So even now, as a species approaching their own awakening, the species has healed a lot. Even now, their species tendency is to swing toward the positive and not want to look at the shadow. So they still now have to be vigilant, so to speak, and keep reminding themselves of that integration. It's become a habit now, the integration, but from time to time, they still have to remind themselves. Okay, so that's a long story for this one card, but it's a very important story because it's very, very connected to you on your earth now. If you have gotten this card, number 39, in one of your spreads or picking it out of the deck, it is a lesson for you to really go within yourself and look at where you're not wanting to see the shadow. And is this unwillingness contributing to some of the challenges in your life? So this is very deep, deep inner shamanic work that is being asked of you when this card comes up. And in this time now on your earth, also, collectively, you are experiencing the same thing as the Pleiadians did, because generally speaking, humans have not wanted to go deep into the shadow. And this is one of the reasons for all the distractions of your world, whether it be smartphones, the million television channels you have, whatever it is. The distractions are allowing you to not have to see this darkness as the world around you is becoming more toxic and more ill, so to speak. And now you are having this toxicity coming out within many of the structures on your planet. As we speak in this time right now, a lot of it's coming out in your political structures because simply of this same Pleiadian pattern of not wanting to look at the shadow. All right, so we could go off on this. Many of you who have been to our workshops know we've talked about this a lot, but for the sake of this video, we're going to keep moving. All right, so now we're going to go to the next card, and again, it is a trait of a young species. And if you look at symbolically on your world the teenage years of your teenager, you're going to see the same type of pattern playing out there as well. So card number 40, again, Pleiadian, first era. The theme is stubbornness. And stubbornness, as you see in the teenager, might play itself out as believing that one knows the only truth and those older and wiser don't know what they're talking about. That's one example from the teenage point of view. So if you apply this to the Pleiadian idea and what they went through as a young species, then you're going to see that the challenge we just talked about and about not wanting to look at the shadow was enhanced by the stubbornness of a young species who absolutely believed that they knew the truth and would not explore anything further. They would not go into the areas that would leave them weak or vulnerable. And so the stubbornness was kind of a way of self-protection. This, again, as we've said, is very common for a young species, and it's also playing out on your world now as well, with no one wanting to see the other person's side from a place of non-polarized awareness. That stubbornness obviously keeps everyone and everything stuck. So if you've gotten the stubbornness card in your reading with the cards, well, it really does not need any explanation, yes? It's asking you to look at your own stubbornness, your own unwillingness to move forward or to break an old habit or to look at something from a non-dual perspective. Now again, depending on your circumstance, it may be referring to the stubbornness of someone or others around you and your response to that. So again, you have to look at your life situation, utilize the card's message, but also use your intuition about what is the right interpretation for the card at that time. All right, next, again, we're going to the patterns of young civilizations, and this is a big one. This is, again, Pleiades, first era, card number 41, and the theme is guilt. We say this is a big one because of its insidiousness within the emotional body of a being. And we'll talk about this in a moment. But first, we're going to talk just very briefly, some of you know the story, about the incident that happened for the Pleiadians in the ancient times that triggered the means by which they could finally release, purge, and heal the guilt. All right, the inner guilt that they were carrying. Basically, to make a very long story short, when the Orion civilization was in one of its darkest times, this was also in terms of parallel time stream, the time period when the Pleiadian civilization was young and new. And with that attitude of the teenager and the stubbornness and the I know better than everyone else, the Pleiadian civilization decided to make a very aggressive move to free those that were oppressed within the Orion civilization. It was kind of a very naive move that was based on their immaturity as a species. Well, probably many of you know you don't mess with the Orions, especially if you are young and immature. And basically speaking, the retribution for that action was the destruction of one planet within the Pleiadian civilization. The entire planet simply obliterated, and the remains were left there basically like an empty shell. You can imagine that this incident was a major shock and trauma for this young Pleiadian species. And after they got over the post-traumatic stress, as an example, they then had to set about with their own healing process. And that was the incident that triggered their willingness to finally go into their emotional bodies and heal what they had been carrying for so very long. Now, to talk about this issue of guilt, however, we're going to bring it to modern day, we're going to bring it to life on Earth, we're going to bring it to the human emotional body. Basically speaking, guilt is an emotion that is carried by some people for things they've done, perhaps, or even people they've hurt unintentionally, which in that sense then, the unintentional action really did not create any karma or anything such as that. And also some people carry this energy of guilt simply for existing. Now, we could give a whole lecture just on this, but in the interest of keeping these little segments short, we're simply going to say this one thing about guilt right now. When a human being becomes mired in guilt, it can be used by the ego as a defense mechanism so that you don't go deeper into the emotional body for where the deeper pain lies. So, if you have people with these patterns of guilt that are weighing on their shoulders their whole lives, the heaviness of that stops them from moving forward, experiencing their passion and joy in life, but it also stops them from moving inward to heal the even deeper pain below the layer of guilt. So guilt is a mechanism by the ego that is used specifically as a protection. And in order to see this then, one has to, in a sense, travel into the whole guilt mechanism and begin to unravel it and see it for the illusion it really is. It's not a fun process, but it's a necessary process on your road to awakening. And again, we've said in some of the previous videos that as we get deeper into this card series, we're going to be talking more about the awakening process as it relates to the unraveling of the knots, if you will, of your emotional bodies. The guilt pattern is one of those knots that you can stay stuck in forever. So, if this card has come up in your reading, then our suggestion is that you really look at where you might be carrying guilt. Remembering that guilt is very insidious. It might, for some of you, it might be very obvious that you did something, this or that, and have guilt about it. But if you carry the kind of guilt that is non-specific, meaning that you can't really attach an action that you've done to it, but just this overall feeling that you feel guilty for something even though you don't know what it is, that is a signpost about where to go next in the unraveling of your emotional body so that you can get to the core of the brightness of your true essence. So guilt is one of those doorways all beings on the path to awakening have to pass through. So if you've gotten this card, please consider that it is a gift and it is a signpost for you to go deeper in that area so that you can then unlock another aspect of you that has been kept under wraps for a very, very long time. The Pleiadians did it. Human beings are in the process of doing it now as well. Finally, we go to the last card here. And once again, we are in Pleiadian First Era. This is card number 42, and the theme is blind enthusiasm. This again is pointing to that immaturity and youngness of the Pleiadian species at this time, and it was one of their characteristics where they would, much like a teenager, and if any teenagers are watching, if you're watching this, you pretty much maybe don't fall into this category, yes? So we apologize to the teenagers that might be watching. It's just a good metaphor to use. Much like teenagers, they get this idea to do something without thinking through the consequences. This is also what allowed the Pleiadians to make that move against the Orion Empire, for which the retribution was quite strong. So blind enthusiasm is also another, let's say, manifestation of not wanting to look at the shadow, because looking at the consequences of your actions truly and objectively means that you have to put the shadow in the equation. Blind enthusiasm, you don't have to put the shadow in the equation. So it's another way to deal with not wanting to look at the shadow aspect of things. So if this card has come into your reading, it's asking you to look at perhaps some of the decisions in your life or actions in your life happening now or in the past that resulted from that kind of naive, blind, enthusiastic aspect. And it's asking you to, well, first forgive yourself for that. It's quite all right. Everyone has that experience. But also to remind you to begin integrating both the shadow and the light in all of your future actions. Be very aware in a non-polarized way of what your actions can generate in the physical world. You might also want to look at, perhaps there might be others around you who are acting from that blind enthusiasm and wanting to drag you into, and listen to your gut, because if it doesn't feel right, then there is no need for you to do it. This again was one of the very hard-won lessons the Pleiadians learned as a young species. And all of the energies that we've talked about today with the 4 different cards are playing out and finishing now within the human mass consciousness. So it's one of the reasons why there is a lot of chaos going on in your world, and emotionally many people are feeling very overwhelmed, because you're being asked now to go deep into the emotional body and heal these old wounds so that you can move on into second era Earth experience. You're on the cusp, you're getting ready, and your galactic family can show you the way through the map of their experiences as well. Until next time, we send you much love, and we'll see you in the next journey.